My name is Ryan Frailino. I'll be your host for today's webinar, and welcome to Unlocking 31% year-over-year growth and how to turn customer cost concerns into customer expansion. Joining us today is the one and only Jennifer Goodrich. Jennifer, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, my name is Jen Goodrich. I am a senior account manager here at AWS. I've been with AWS almost 6 years now. The first 4 of those years were in the startup organization, and now I cover enterprise ISVs. So hopefully today I'll be able to speak a little bit about my experience with PPAs and how to effectively try and get over some of the initial hurdles that you have when talking to new PPA customers. Thanks, Ryan.
Excellent. Thank you for coming, Jennifer. Pleasure to have you here. Really excited to share your insights with everybody that's joining us today and to work through these topics. So what are we really here to talk about? One, we want to focus on actionable strategies, and among those things, closing rejected or stalled PPAs, accelerating POCs, and overall AWS service adoption, how to pivot from optimization requests into customer consumption growth, how to get more insight into your accounts and your customers via solutions architects, and to build more pipeline through better discovery. So all of this is focused on AWS sellers, Jen's experience, our experience as a partner in the ecosystem. Personally, I've been in the ecosystem for the last 12 years, so I've seen a lot, and we've turned that into information for you all. So what happens when we boil this down? We like to think about these things in terms of the problems that we're solving or how they might manifest within your customers. And so when you see customers that are flat, when you see customers that are slow to grow, a lot of times they have cost concerns. A lot of times that's also driven by limited bandwidth or limited technical expertise on the customer side. And then, of course, when we think about the future and moving forward, we want to think about undiscovered opportunities for growth. What's out there that we're not seeing today? And then lastly, how do we get stalled or lost PPAs back on track and turn those into yeses? That's something that Jennifer certainly has a lot of experience with, as does CloudKeeper. And we want to go to a poll for the group as well. And which problems have you encountered most, or are your highest priorities to solve this year? Is it customer cost concerns? Is it their bandwidth or expertise limitations? Is it undiscovered opportunities for growth, or is it stalled or lost PPAs? We'll give everybody just a little bit of time to answer our poll. We promise we won't be quizzing you through the whole thing, but we do like to understand what your priorities are so we can react accordingly. Okay, excellent. Let's move along here. Okay. So it looks like customer cost concerns, undiscovered opportunities for growth, and stalled or lost PPAs are about evenly split across the group. So that's good. Hopefully most folks will get something out of this in general because of the fact that we're so focused on all of these things. So when we as CloudKeeper think about how do we go about solving these, or how can we as a partner help AWS sellers solve for these challenges, really it boils down to 2 key superpowers that we have. One is our unlimited support, and 2 is our PPA Plus offering. Unlimited support is all of the help that we give folks from a technical and FinOps perspective. So this isn't just cost optimization. This is real solutions architects, DevOps engineers, and experts embedded with our customers that help our customers solve for their challenges. And PPA Plus is really our way to maximize value and maximize the savings associated with a PPA. So breaking that down a bit, with our unlimited support, first thing to know is that this is included for all CloudKeeper customers. It is different than partner-led support. We believe that at the end of the day, our job is to produce outcomes, whether that's savings, whether that's innovation, whether that's experimentation. And we can't do that unless we're really willing to help customers understand what are the pieces they should be putting together on AWS. How should things talk to each other? How do they bridge the gap between technical solution and business outcome? And that's really what our unlimited support is there to help them do. It's backed by hundreds of AWS certified experts. We boast about our killer response time and time after ticket, and we're able to support a number of third-party softwares and applications that aren't necessarily AWS native. So think Snowflake, think Databricks, think things that are across our customer base of 400 customers, the common third-party solutions. And then, of course, we have unlimited access to solutions architects and our AI Center of Excellence. So, question for Jen, how do you think sellers can leverage this kind of support? Where do you think this kind of guidance and expertise is really going to move the needle for customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, especially in the SMB and startup space, the teams are small, right? The engineering teams are small. There's never enough time in a day or enough resources for a project, right? So having the extra layer of support, is a huge value add. I also think a lot of them are, they want to be building something cool and they don't want to be a FinOps analyst. And, I think CloudKeeper gives the capability of removing some of the, financial tracking and FinOps responsibility off of like the engineering team. But overall, I think, every customer I've ever spoken to feels like there's never enough bandwidth to do what they want to do, right? Or to accelerate their projects. So it's definitely a common, feedback, at least that I've received from my customers.
Got it. And, when left to the sort of standard resources available, what impact would you say this has overall on customer consumption? And how do you typically go about navigating them if you don't have the support of a partner?
Yeah, for sure. I think having the extra, ears to the ground or involvement from a partner like yourselves just kind of gets ingrained with the engineering teams and with the customer. Not that we can't do that as well, but obviously we have a lot of customers and, we are at scale. And so sometimes having a bit of a smaller team like a CloudKeeper to be able to help, accelerate some of those projects obviously can help accelerate the consumption of AWS services and therefore, help us drive results both for the customer and internally, on our quotas and our objectives.
Awesome. Yeah. And, I want to share a customer example because a lot of times we tend to focus on, what's the next big migration? What's the next big project or new initiative that a customer might have? And those are all really great things to focus on. That's the heart of innovation. But at the same time, from our perspective, we see a lot of customers that would otherwise be throttled by more mundane things, right? So I want to take folks through this example from our customer, Quince. I don't know about you, but I've certainly seen them blow up over the past 2 years on Instagram and sort of in my life in general. My wife was shopping at Quince this past Christmas, not knowing that they were a customer of CloudKeepers. And they've grown 10x since starting with us, from 34K to over 340K a month in AWS consumption. And we've given them a ton of help along the way, but a lot of this goes unnoticed, right? Sort of a lot of these things we want to be unnoticed because it's the elimination of problems or the proactive approach to problems that has helped them scale. And these are just some of the things that we've helped them do, but their first challenge was sort of scaling via Terraform. They started running into bottlenecks as they scaled up. There was a certain amount of latency introduced into the system that just wasn't working for them to continue to scale at the rate that they wanted. So we were able to help them do a complete redesign and modernization using Crossplane and Argo CD for Kubernetes. In addition to that, this is a customer that has, very big events, particularly Black Friday and Cyber Monday. They're an online retail company. And so most of their business is occurring within the span of a couple of days from the start of, sort of end of Thanksgiving on through Cyber Monday. And so what our team does is they send them this pre-event checklist that we go through with them, looking for operational readiness, technical readiness. There's a number of weeks of pre-planning leading up to that to make sure that we're all aware of what needs to happen, how things need to work, how everything's pieced together. And then over the course of the entire weekend, we set up a 24/7 war room with them. Rest assured, things do happen. In fact, this past Black Friday, Cyber Monday, they started encountering some latency in servicing customers. It boiled down to a particular application element that was having some performance issues. And the point is, we're able to collectively get those resolved with them so they could take most advantage of Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And then as you get bigger, you become more of a target. So they ran into challenges with how do we stay secure? How do we stay secure in a landscape where we need to adopt new services, have new patterns, or they're constantly changing and innovating their infrastructure? So we've done a lot of work to help them in a variety of ways, but most notably, helping them implement AWS WAF as a online retail customer. That is a huge way to protect your business. And then lastly, how do you get to engineering efficiency at scale? As your footprint grows, your engineering team grows. As that all happens, there's conflict in who's updating what. How do we keep our entire SDLC in sync rather than having drift between dev and staging and prod and all these things? So we're able to help them move to a GitOps-based governance solution so that all of that just became streamlined and part of their experience and they could focus on developing. And again, the reason I love this story is, we've all been there for the big migrations. We've all been there for the data center exits into AWS or the hockey stick growth in a customer's consumption. But this is the type of power that CloudKeeper can bring to the table. Yes, we do the migrations and the more classic growth types of engagements, but more importantly, we're there watching and helping customers and holding their hand as they go through all these other internal challenges that become headaches and ultimately bottlenecks for their growth. So with that, I also wanted to share, exactly what kind of accolades is this getting CloudKeeper. And the reason that I really love these two is they're completely driven by customers. So we're rated 5 out of 5 with 100% likelihood to recommend from Gartner Peer Insights. Again, that is driven completely by our customer base. Very hard to achieve, very easy to achieve, less than 100% likelihood to recommend. And on G2 customer ratings, we were actually the only vendor to receive 100% customer satisfaction score. They update these rankings seasonally. We continue to win these awards. And not only is CloudKeeper providing a rock-solid platform for customers to understand what they're spending, how that's changing, how should they navigate their business, we're providing support that they really don't have internally, and then most partners are chasing, additional SOWs and additional professional services engagements just to help customers do the thing we all want them to do, which is really innovate and grow. So you might be wondering, how can I get CloudKeeper in front of my customers? What's an easy way to gain more insight into what my customers are doing and what's really happening on the ground? And it's actually originated as a request from an AWS seller who said, look, I need a way that is no cost, no friction, no contracts, no obligations to get CloudKeeper in front of my customers. I see them struggling with the exact types of things you're talking about, and I want you to work with them. Problem is, they're averse to working with partners. They either think they can do everything themselves, or maybe they've had a bad experience in the past. That's really not uncommon, unfortunately, in our industry. And so what we've launched is our Solutions Architect as a service, which is 6 weeks of unlimited SA support. There's no strings attached. There's no prerequisites. There's no contracts. There's no obligations on behalf of the customer. And what they get is exposure to our customer success team, which are the folks on the ground sort of driving all of this foundational support for our customers, as well as access to our Lens and Tuner platforms. So if anyone is interested in this, we do have talk tracks, email scripts, full program documentation, case studies, etc., that you can leverage. If you're interested, reach out to your CloudKeeper seller, or we have a contact at the end for you to reach out to. We can make this look like a number of different pre-packaged engagement patterns, but it doesn't have to be that way. But POCs, well-architected reviews, Gen AI workshops, helping folks with FDR compliance to get onto the AWS marketplace. All of these are part and parcel of what we're doing day in and day out. So if you want somebody to come in and run a smooth, pre-packaged operation with your customers, we can do that. Or if they have a particular issue, we're always happy to tackle that. I see our team do it all the time. And we'll be very upfront about what our expertise is or is not in any particular AWS solution. And again, the point here is what happens when you embed an additional technical expert with your customers? What is the outcome? Can we accelerate it? Can we learn more about what's actually going on the ground at your customer and use that to inform how you attack that account from a strategic perspective? So next, I want to move on to PPAs. And Jen, this is something that you are particularly well versed in. And I want to know about your experience with PPA discovery in particular, and what have you seen be most successful, and how's that different from a more typical discovery approach?
Yeah, for sure. And even before I kind of go into the discovery stuff, I think, I'll just start by saying, I mentioned I was in the startup organization for 4 years, and I probably had about 10 different at bats with, for PPAs with customers that, had between 500K or 1.5 million in ARR that I wasn't able to actually close at the end of the day because various different reasons, because the value, the commitment versus the savings wasn't there when you included the enterprise support uptick, or because I couldn't get them to commit or whatnot. So, the challenge is there. And I think had I known CloudKeeper back then, I wish I had, I probably would have made a lot more money and been able to get my customers onto PPAs faster. So I just kind of wanted to preface that by saying, having CloudKeeper as an additional sort of tool in your tool belt is something that most of us should be leveraging. So when it comes to the discovery process, I'd say, most startups and SMBs have never been through a PPA process before, right? And so I think before you can kind of dive into the numbers and the financial analysis around it, it's really important to take a step back and kind of, help them understand the EDP model and how it works and what its purpose is, and, kind of make sure that they have a good grasp on all of that before you dive into the financials, because it's super, super common, I feel like, for customers to go into analysis paralysis around the numbers and the spreadsheets and, nickel and dime every line item. So I think it's really important to kind of have that initial level set, with all of the stakeholders, both the technical and the business. I will say that what I find to be more successful is to almost have two separate talk tracks. When you're having that initial discovery with the technical folks who are responsible or who have been told that they're responsible for trying to come up with some sort of a forecast for their team and their team's spend on AWS specific services, right? So you'll kind of get into some of the weeds, with the technical folks around what services they consume today, and, is that expected to, what the growth is expected over the next 3 years. And then kind of talk track number two is around like with the C-suite and the executives, which I think it's really important to sort of extract the summary of the financial situation and just like the annual commit, the total term commitment term, and, the value that they're getting in return for that commitment. And this way, it makes it easier for them to sort of make a decision without having to go too deep for them, that you've done that process with their team, right? So I kind of almost, have two separate talk tracks depending on the discovery and who I'm talking to.
I love that because, we see this all the time where we'll get down the road with, let's say, the technical team because they're ultimately responsible for the budget. And so we're sort of, assuming that they are the decision maker. And we'll go through the road mapping with them. We'll go through, what do we think your consumption is going to be 1, 2, 3 years from now? Have we incorporated all of the, services that they're going to adopt as part of XYZ initiatives, only to get to the outcome. And we finally have to bring in the CFO or the VP of finance who says, not for nothing, this kind of commitment is material for us, and we're not sure that we can move forward despite all the work you've done. Thank you. Let us either go back and consider this more and see what other options we have, or outright just avoid commitment. Maybe they're averse to it because their board is going to be averse to it, or maybe they're thinking, hey, we're going to spin off part of this business. So I love the idea of the dual-pronged talk track and navigation for approaching a PPA, despite the fact it can be intimidating to be on the phone with finance people, and you may feel like there's a gap there. But I think, the way you framed it does a really good job of like, hey, here's what's going on the ground with the technical team and what they're trying to do. Here's a program that AWS has that will help you get there, and will help you get there, scale more cost effectively. So that part is...
Well, I think, one other thing that I think I forgot to mention is, during that initial sort of the overall construct or the high level, discovery of what an EDP or what a PPA does, I try and do a timeline, like a reverse timeline slide during that, discussion. And executive alignment is sort of always in there as a requirement versus not like a, it's a must, right? And so I kind of add that in there early on in the process so that they are familiar and aware that whoever we're talking to, that we're going to have that executive alignment before we can ever go for approvals or before we can ever, kind of get to that final step. So I think I had forgot to mention that, but a backwards timeline to give yourself enough time for the paperwork, especially internally for those AWS folks on the line. Our paperwork, new Apex tool is, can be challenging. So I would give yourselves plenty of time to get through all of that.
It's a great point, but it does make me wonder, like for you, what's the ideal timing of expanding the conversation to the executive team? Because obviously you want to approach them with some level of information about what the roadmap is and where folks are going, what the impact might be, but you don't want to wait to have every single thing accounted for. So I'm curious how you navigate the timing of all that.
Yeah, for sure. I would say before we even, get any type of term sheet or any type of, physical documentation out to the customer, at least at minimum, I usually say before we can get term sheets for you to review, we're going to need executive alignment, right? So almost like we need that in order to get any paperwork released. Like, yeah, we talked about all of the numbers and I think we've come to a good, a verbal agreement. And now we're going to need to get executive alignment in order to get the contract generated. So now, obviously, if you can get them involved way early on, great, right? Like if there's some catalyst, like a merger and an acquisition that sort of kicked off the conversation at an executive level, then great. But if you have been unable to get an executive involved up until that point, then that was kind of the last point that I try and get them involved.
Awesome. Love that as a forcing function and a must-have on the checklist for approaching a PPA. Time has come for our second poll. Curious if anyone has encountered a lost or stalled PPA, and if so, what was the primary reason it didn't close? And Jen, for you, it sounds like all of these played some kind of factor at some point across your years at AWS.
Or creating my head against a wall.
Yeah. Are there any here that were like, more prevalent than others?
For me, it was the enterprise support cost, right? Majority of my customers did not have, maybe developer, if even basic, right? So that uptick in support cost was just astronomical and outweighed any of the savings. So they were either back to a net neutral, and it's like, why make the 3-year commitment for $0 in savings? Or sometimes it was even negative savings, right? They'd actually costed them more to, because of the cost of enterprise support. So I would say that one was the biggest hurdle that I had to overcome.
Got it. Okay. And again, really common for us to come across that in the ecosystem, not a new problem for us. And if we want to move along, I think that's given folks enough time to answer the poll. Oh, I see the results, and looks like the majority is savings offset by the increase in support costs. And then coming in close number 2 is customer wasn't willing to commit to growth. So
Yeah.
the good news is on both of those, we have levers we can pull CloudKeeper side to help with that. This is an example of one of those scenarios. This is not made up. This is something we encountered in the field and exactly how we approached it. This was in the startup segment, and the ask for the customer was a commitment to about $1 million, 1.2, and 1.5 million over 3 years. And in exchange, you can see what their percent discount was. But at the end of the day, they also then had to move up to enterprise support. So the way that their finance team was looking at it was like, look, you may be offering us, between 6 and 8% discount, but you're also costing us now about 10%. So this just doesn't make any sense. We're not actually saving any money when we take this approach. At the same time, they brought it to CloudKeeper, and we were able to do a couple of things. Number one, lower the commitment so that everybody else felt safer about what was actually being committed to. Number two, increase the discount in and of itself. With the new RPPA rules, this has gotten even more compelling. So this is what this actually would have looked like today as an opening offer to a customer. And then obviously moving them to partner-led support at a much more cost-effective rate. So now, just at face value, the total net savings went from negative 3% or so to a positive 5.5%. Now, for each customer, we have to also account for what they're paying for today. So this customer scenario was they were paying for business support, but then it was more of an insurance policy. What if something goes wrong? It's not like they were opening tickets all the time, but they did rely on the SLA. So once we actually factored in the cost of business support, now they're saving on both the support itself and on the PPA discount. So the total net savings for them was, around 12, 13%, which is significantly different and obviously led to a much different outcome than, pursuing this just in general. Now, one other thing that we tend to see is, hang on, before we get into a PPA, we need to optimize first. We want to encourage that. That is a best practice. We want to make sure that folks are as optimized as possible going into a PPA so that they commit to a realistic level of consumption. CloudKeeper, as it happens, is very, very good at this. This is the core of what we do. We can do it very quickly, and we think of ourselves as a PPA on-ramp. So again, if you do encounter this, don't consider the deal necessarily gone. It can disappear if you don't pursue it with diligence and push customers to actually execute optimization and then come back to the PPA. But on the CloudKeeper side, this is a very routine process for us to bring on a customer, chip away at accelerated optimization, and then come back to them with the, a revised PPA and make sure that that gets prioritized for them and that they have confidence in what they're spending, how they're going to grow, what their visibility is into consumption, so on and so forth. So really common pattern for us that if you encounter a customer that wants to optimize, you want to make sure that you actually get back to the PPA in a timely fashion. Don't hesitate to call on CloudKeeper. So one other thing I wanted to mention, I know a lot of folks have a pretty broad number of accounts and you don't always have the chance to get to all of them or have these in-depth conversations. You can work with CloudKeeper. We have a team of over 50 demand gen reps focused on just MyT that can reach out to your customers on your behalf. Another thing that we see AWS sellers doing that's been working really well is going through their account list, identifying those that are at PPA eligible spend or near PPA eligible spend, and in particular, those that don't have enterprise support, and coming to their respective seller at CloudKeeper and saying, listen, these are my PPA targets. I want to put together a strategy for getting to all of these. How do we go about setting up a successful initial meeting? How do we go about setting up a compelling PPA offer? Oftentimes, we can, in fact, show a customer in the first meeting what a PPA looks like, so we avoid any sort of negative impression of, oh yeah, you just want to upsell me to enterprise support, so on and so forth. We can show them the path to a very lucrative PPA right from the jump, which gets them much more excited and paints a better picture of what the actual potential from a PPA is. So with that, if you want to get started with any of these things with CloudKeeper, our sales team is organized such that every AWS team has a seller assigned to them at CloudKeeper. Most of you should know who that is. If you haven't, or if you don't, feel free to reach out to Stephanie Sanchez. She is our wonderful alliance manager. She provides national coverage for CloudKeeper, and she's happy to connect you with the right resource. Again, that's PPAs, that's unlimited support. That is, anything you might need to help position us, talk tracks, decks, one sheets, whatever the case may be. And take a screenshot of her email address and feel free to reach out to her. So we're going to move to feedback and questions. Okay, I see one question from Tim Ramos. What's the talk track when customers ask, why is enterprise support required with PPAs? What we typically tell customers is that enterprise support is a way for customers to operate in AWS more effectively. The reason for that is we're taking SLAs seriously. We're taking account reviews and well-architected reviews much more seriously. This isn't, just an insurance policy. It's a way to proactively ensure the success of your business. And so for what AWS and CloudKeeper are trying to do is facilitate growth of a customer. But when we do that, we want to keep their risk in mind, right? If they're trying to scale a very suboptimal architecture pattern to, have 20%, 30%, 40% growth or more over the course of 3 years, we want to make sure that we've got the right foundation in place and the right stewardship in place so that they get everything they need as they scale. Jen, do you have any insight there? What do you say when why is enterprise support required?
I think, one of the main things that I typically say is if you're going to lean in with AWS and go, enter into a long-term commitment, we need to have the appropriate mechanisms in place to properly support you and do our job. AWS needs the proper mechanisms in place to do our job properly, right? And without enterprise support, it's less guaranteed that we can support you properly, right? So, being able to have the ticketing mechanism, being able to have the escalation mechanisms for your production workloads, right? All of that is key to us, successfully supporting our customers. And so, if you're going to lean in with us, we want to lean in with you, and that's just sort of how we've, done that in the past. So, and from a seller's perspective, like, there's no way around it, right? It's truly a requirement.
Yeah. Oops. That makes total sense, and I think aligns with our perspective as well. It's sort of like going to the doctor. Like, you may not want to do it, but it is definitely in your best interest one way or another, right? To have your annual checkup or whatever the case may be. Here is another question, which is how long does it take for CloudKeeper to close a PPA if a customer is already interested? We can turn around a PPA in a matter of weeks. I'll say 3 to 4 weeks now. Since the change in Apex, we do have to be mindful of what is the process? Did we get the demand plan right? There's a particular way that we tend to do that because of the way that we lock ourselves out of customer environments. So, I would say as short as 3 weeks, but give yourself more time than that, only because we want to make sure that if something does change or if something, there's an error somewhere, you sort of have to reset at the start of the PPR process and go back through all those approvals. But, for us, if you come and tell us like, hey, I've got a PPA, this is what it looks like for commitments, we can turn around what an offer from us would look like in, let's say, 24 hours or so. Yeah, another great question. What do you tell customers who ask why they would use the SA as a service offering from CloudKeeper when they already have access to an AWS SA for free? In most cases, SA bandwidth can be very limited, or at least insofar as sort of like spending multiple hours, multiple days a week on a singular customer. A lot of SAs are covering, at least a few AWS account managers, so they can't necessarily go as deep or spend as much time as may be required to really fast track a particular solution for a customer. And so I think the biggest benefit of using the SA is really about like, this is truly unlimited versus somebody that has hard constraints on their actual time. So that's generally the primary reason we see people doing that.
Brian, I'd also position it as it's an and, not an or, right? It's both. You now get an additional SA for, additional resource help, right? Because your AWS SA is still available and still, and where I find that AWS SAs have strength is in the features and functionality of our service portfolio. Whereas where I find that the partner SAs have strengths in the practical implementation of those services, right? And when you combine those two knowledge bases together, you get, basically full coverage. And so I think that's also how I would position it, as they are complementary, not or.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, really well put. Like we saw on the Quince case study, again, we're able to support third-party solutions like Argo CD and, in fact, DevOps implementation is a huge part of what we do. And so when you think about, it's not that AWS SAs can't support those things, is that, we have no problem looking at some other third-party tool that may or may not be on somebody's radar, or they may not have the time to research how it works with a particular AWS service or set of services. So that's a really good framing, Jen. This is additional firepower. They're not mutually exclusive. And let me look at the questions here. I've heard CloudKeeper can commit to more than the customer when executing a PPA. Is that true? And if so, how much more can you commit to? Great question. So we can alleviate the commitment for customers in certain ways. This has actually changed a bit now that the new RPPA guidelines are out. We have even more flexibility in terms of the discount we can offer relative to the customer commitment. So where we focus on this now is more a matter, how do we help AWS sellers hit their goals? right? If, we can allow the customer to commit to, say, 10% less than we are committing to AWS, does that help you? Do we think it's realistic? Do we think it's in the best interest of the customer? So the game has changed there. Yes, it is true. Yes, we're happy to work with you on it to sort of get past a particular consumption milestone. There's no set amount. It sort of depends, and we need to understand, is the customer just being really conservative in what they're willing to commit to? Or what are their real expectations for growth relative to the ask? And can we, for example, push more of the commitment difference to the first year or 2 years as opposed to the third year where it creates more risk? So all that we can sort of walk through with you and handle on a case by case basis. But there is no set amount, but yes, it is true and it is possible. Okay, how much time can we expect they can dedicate to customers during the 6-week period? Good question. Our approach is to keep it genuinely unlimited. I think it's more of a case by case basis. Like, it may not be one person if it turns out the ask is to design the Titanic, right? So it comes in a lot of shapes and sizes, but we have not put any limitations on it. Our goal when we engage with the customer is to be very clear about what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want your team to do versus what we should do? We don't want folks getting solutions coming out of a black box. We do want to educate them. So we're prepared to spend a lot of time with them, not just for the, hey, solve my problem piece, but for the, hey, can we actually get your customer enabled and educated as part of that? So all that to say, timing is variable. Again, our goal is to be very upfront about that anytime we do encounter it. So we are down to about the last minute here. Jen, I want to thank you for spending your time with us, sharing your insights. Incredibly happy to have you on here. I want to thank everybody for coming today. And again, if you don't know who your dedicated person is at CloudKeeper, please reach out to Stephanie Sanchez. She'll be more than happy to help you. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.